Your happiness is controlled through a screen. At least that's what they tell you. But is it true?
The more time young adults spend on social media, the more likely they are to be depressed.
There's been a causal connection established between time spent on social media and depression and loneliness.
Research suggests a link between spending excessive time on social media and depression.
And I'm concerned that social media is an important driver of that youth mental health crisis.
How long are we staying on social media? And the really important piece is, how is it making us feel?
If you're Gen Z or a millennial, it's not making you feel great. This represents the percentage of teens in the United States with major depression since 2005. The red line represents how much of the world's population is on YouTube. Both of these lines have a large increase around 2011. In fact, rates of major depression nearly doubled for US teens from 2010 to 2020. On its own, this isn't enough evidence to say YouTube causes depression. But recent research does suggest that social media has started a war with your brain. Is your mental health at risk, or does this war actually benefit you? The answer might surprise you. Although social media has been around for a little while, its true power wasn't realized until about 2012. In January of 2012, Facebook secretly manipulated the feeds of nearly 700,000 people. Unknowingly, Facebook users were randomly split into one of two groups. One group had their Facebook feed transformed into a paradise. They only saw things like cute puppies, laughing babies, and pictures to restore your faith in humanity. The other group wasn't so lucky. They saw only the worst of the internet. Things like the job market crashing, increase in crime rates, and posts about how hard life is in general. Again, this was all done secretly. These people had no idea their feeds were actually being manipulated. From their perspective, what they're seeing is really representative of what's happening in the world. Facebook then monitored how these users interacted with Facebook, finding unsurprisingly that people who had more positive feeds tended to post more positive status updates, whereas people who were given the negative feeds tend to post more negative status updates. This experiment by Facebook was really done just as a test to see if they really had emotional control over us through social media. At one point, they actually tested what would happen if they removed all the posts about anything remotely emotional, and that actually caused these people to use Facebook less, which then gives Facebook the motivation to try to keep emotionally charged content in your feeds, that way you're using Facebook more. It's honestly disturbing because this was the start of social media platforms really testing the waters, and again, this was over a decade ago. To put that in perspective, when this experiment was being run, Vine didn't exist. So just imagine what social media companies have been doing secretly behind closed doors since then. The solution here is not to stop using social media, as it's actually more beneficial for you than you might think. It's also just not realistic in this day and age. It's ingrained in all of our lives. And while there are benefits to social media, we'll get into later, you should at least understand how social media is affecting your mental health, because it is affecting your mental health in some profound ways. Each time you use social media, there's a war going on in your head between the good parts of your brain and social media versus the bad parts of your brain and social media. It's not as simple as people often make it out to be. Even just the phrase mental health can be a little complex, so let's talk about it. First of all, I pretty much hate the phrase mental health. It's more of a buzzword used by popular media, like, oh, this is affecting my health, that's affecting my mental health. It's just such a vague term. Like, if something's worse for your mental health, what does that mean? Even by looking at the definition of mental health provided by the American Psychological Association, there's a lot of different parts to it. Mental health could refer to something super serious, like depression or anxiety, but it could also refer to just brain fog or being tired. When someone comes along and they're like, I'm just having a bad mental health day, do they need therapy, or do they need to just chug a Celsius like the rest of us? I really don't know. I think I've heard the phrase mental health like twice during the entirety of getting my psychology degree, and it doesn't get used really when you're looking through the psych literature. I mean, maybe in the title, but it's not going to get used when they're actually doing the study, because they will just tell you what they're measuring. They're not going to be like, oh, here's mental health. So going forward, instead of using the phrase mental health, I'm going to just tell you what I mean. There's no value in me telling you this makes your mental health better or worse, because you can't do anything with that. But if I tell you, well, doing this might make you more lonely, well, then you know you could go hang out with some friends and you can fix that. You know, that's something you can take steps from. But saying it affects your mental health, what does that do for you? Overall, mental health, super overused, often misused, and it just kind of sucks. So let's not use it. Happy Mental Health Awareness Month, by the way. Here's a fun fact. 90% of people between the ages of 18 and 29 and 85% of people of those aged 13 to 17 use at least one social media platform. We've all basically got some social media, but how often are we actually using it? I mean, if your phone screen time looks anything like mine, you're probably cooked. Like it's probably over for us, I'm gonna be honest. On average, we spend about 2.5 hours a day on social media, which isn't great when you learn that teens who actually spend 3 hours or more on social media, just above that 2.5 hour mark, teens actually double their risk for symptoms of depression and anxiety. So we're cutting it close here. Not great. What really determines how productive or destructive social media is for your brain is how you use it. In a recent research article, researchers looked at the relationship between social media use and psychological well-being. Just saying psychological well-being is just as vague and just as bad as just saying mental health. So let me tell you what the research actually measured. This research looked at a ton of studies and synthesized all their findings and results into one super paper. So across all these studies, the researchers characterized well-being as basically more of the good stuff and less of the bad stuff. Or specifically, someone who is high in psychological well-being has heightened self-esteem, feels socially connected, generally happy, and is overall satisfied with their life. Simultaneously, this person experiences little to no depression, anxiety, and loneliness. Now, I did say that this is a war after all, so let's make things a little more interesting by visualizing this war. Instead of just me reading this research paper to you, let's make some visuals and play this out as a story between your brain and social media, and we'll see who comes out on top at the end. On one side, we have our heroes, things like peace, happiness, self-esteem, you get the idea. On the other side, we have our opposition, things like stress, depression, self-doubt, loneliness, you get the point. I know the art is horrendous, and I'm gonna just be honest with you, I'm gonna keep it a buck with you. Probably gonna get worse. But by the end of this video, we'll see who's winning this war, and by how much is the winning side winning by. From there, we're gonna talk about what that really means and what you can do about it. The first thing we should consider is our motivation for using social media. What made you pick up your phone and hop on TikTok in the first place? You can use social media purely as entertainment or even as a way to keep in touch with people. And using social media purely for entertainment or just to keep up with people is perfectly good reason to use it. It only gets hairy when we start using it for compensation. Maybe it's escapism, where you're just scrolling TikTok because you're just really not trying to do that homework right now, and then suddenly it's 2 a.m. And you still didn't do your homework, but at least your laptop was open, so that counts for something. Or maybe your motivation stems from a fear of missing out, some FOMO going on. Maybe you saw your friend's Snap story of all your other friends hanging out together without you, and you're just like, oh, that looks fun. I wish I got the invite to that. Although more research needs to be done in this area, it seems likely that enhancement motivations for using social media, like entertainment or keeping up with people, can be good for your well-being, whereas using social media for compensation, like escapism or FOMO, leads to worse well-being outcomes. As far as our war is considered, both sides get some reinforcements. The problem with looking at motivation for being on social media isn't always so clear to us why we're using it in the first place. A lot of times you just pick up your phone and start scrolling. It's done pretty unconsciously. Once we're actually on social media, we can use it in a few different ways. Most of the time, we're just passive consumers of content, but we can also be active users and post something ourselves. When we're passively using social media, we tend to compare ourselves a lot to others, which is related to lower self-esteem as well as increased depression and anxiety. There's also a handful of research that suggests when we do make social comparisons to others, we tend to compare ourselves to those that we perceive as better than us, which also leads to a decrease in our self-esteem. And what makes it all worse is people aren't usually posting about their real life. We're scrolling through feeds of edited, exaggerated snapshots of our friends' lives. Passively scrolling through Instagram was actually found to lead to more of a depressed mood in users. And passively scrolling through Facebook has been shown to lead to a decrease in self-esteem. But social comparisons aren't always bad. I mean, you might see a fitness influencer online who looks a certain way that you want to look like, or they do a certain exercise that you want to learn how to do. So naturally you compare yourselves to them, but not in a negative way, not in some detrimental beating yourself up kind of way, but more of in a positive way. Like, my body doesn't look like that right now, but I want it to. So I'm going to see where my shortcomings are and go to the gym and exercise and actually improve myself. It's not coming from a bad spirited place in your head at all. But again, this is much less likely. So in our war, passive social media use will give the enemies a tank. But there are some social comparisons we can make that are actually actually good for us. So to represent my example of fitness influencers, we'll be defending our brain with Bradley Martin.
I'm 260, bro.
We can also actively use social media. When you're actively using social media instead of just passively browsing, the game changes a little. Even if you're an introvert, we all crave attention, especially from the right people. Presenting yourself positively in social media leads to immediate gains in well-being, satisfying this craving. The key to getting psychological benefits when posting is to make authentic posts that frame you in a positive light. The research shows mixed results when just talking about posts in general, but they all come back positive when we're talking about posting our authentic selves. Authentic posts can lead to increases in happiness and self-esteem while lowering symptoms of depression. Well-being is also boosted by getting support via likes and comments after making a post, especially if it's about something personal. I've never seen a post in my life on any platform where someone opens up about something personal or says something that's very wholesome and just the comments are flooded with hate. It just doesn't happen. Unless you're on Twitter or Instagram Reels. All this really means is our allies have just acquired some more backup. Who you're interacting with on social media also plays a huge part in whether social media is benefiting your brain or causing pandemonium. Using social media to interact with people you know well, people you'd say are in your inner circle. Interacting with these people leads to an increase in well-being, and a handful of research actually suggests an association between following a bunch of strangers or acquaintances and lower self-esteem as well as a lower overall life satisfaction. Interacting with these people may also lead to a displacement effect. All that means is there's a limited amount of time in the day, and if you're spending a lot more time interacting with people you don't know as well, in comparison to the amount of time you're spending with people you do know better, you just simply have less time in the day to spend with people that are closer to you, people you like more, people you know better, and as a result can have long-term detriments to your psychological well-being. For the most part, research shows that social media is most beneficial to us when we're interacting with the homies, and it can be a little disastrous if we're constantly interacting with strangers over social media all the time. In terms of our war, who we're interacting with on social media actually gives us support for both sides, with a slight edge given to the enemies. And as informative as my beautiful artwork is, what does it all mean? Social media is super integrated into our daily lives, and I have a funny feeling that it's only going to be more and more integrated into the lives of future generations. And in general, for most people, limiting social media use probably isn't super practical, and according to our battlefield, might not be all that necessary either. Instead, the research just suggests we be more mindful of how and why we're using social media. So here's some key takeaways. At some point, probably later today, you're gonna start scrolling some platform. I am too. Whenever you're done scrolling, just take 4 seconds to think about what motivated you to scroll in the first place. If you're scrolling because you're bored and want some entertainment, that's totally cool. But if you're scrolling to escape from something in real life or because of a fear of missing out, there's a deeper underlying problem there, and if it's possible to be addressed before you scroll again, that would be ideal. Remember, posting on social media and interacting with close friends actually can lead to a boost in psychological well-being. Just make sure you're being you. On the other hand, passively browsing social media and especially frequent interactions with strangers is more harmful than you would think. Again, that doesn't mean you shouldn't talk to or interact with strangers online. That's stupid. Just be mindful of how often you're doing that in comparison to how often you're interacting with your current friends and family. Bottom line, you should use social media for entertainment or to check up on what the homies are up to. Either way, just don't compare yourself to an edited highlight reel of someone else's life. If you learned anything from this video, make sure to subscribe. It's totally free and you can always unsubscribe later. I don't upload all the time either because I'm in grad school right now, which basically just means I'm busy all the time. So it might be a good idea to hit the bell so you get a notification when I upload, especially if it's for a video you commented and requested for. Speaking of comments, being a small channel, I read every single one, and I really appreciate all the positive messages I've gotten on previous videos. All of your comments are just super encouraging. I appreciate them more than you know.